State government coverage right now is really an endangered species of journalism right now.
State capitals were once known for a robust cast of characters known as the press corps. They were dogged, they were determined, sometimes they weren't particularly polite, but they got the story. Today, not so much. We're putting the future of the state capitol press corps in context. Coming up.
TFIC takes you deeper into the stories that are shaping the future of state and local government.
To boldly go where no man has gone before.
You're not Buzz Lightyear.
I'm Siri.
And I'm Google.
And I am Alexa.
Alexa seems so smart, I think we'd have a lot to talk about.
Pew, pew.
From Governing and Government Technology, this is The Future in Context. I'm Ashley Silver. On this episode, we consider the future of state government news coverage in the context of significant demographic change, financial shifts in media, and the potential for sale or ban of TikTok in the United States. That would leave another hole in the media landscape for millions of Americans. Against that backdrop, my co-hosts, Zena Hutton and Paul Taylor, explored these themes with some help from a leading journalism educator.
Zena Hutton from Governing, welcome back.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Of course, you're known as part of the Government A to Z crew, anchoring the alphabet in that last letter. But we're here to talk about something related, a little generational, but also about this craft that both you and I are involved in. And whether they know it or not, public officials are also at least adjacent to this craft, and that is the craft of journalism. There are a couple of names that are not familiar, but probably should be. The Collier Prize and Hub Brown. Let's start with Hub Brown. Who is he? What does he do? And where does he do it?
He is the dean of the journalism school at University of Florida, UF. He's in the heart of the state, kind of, and it's really wild to say that because I know where I'm located, but Orlando really is the heart of Florida to a lot of people. And so he is responsible for helping guide the next generation of journalists.
You talked to him about the Collier Prize. What is it and why does it matter?
So the Collier Prize is, well, the full name is the Collier Prize for State Accountability in Journalism? Probably just...
Collier Prize in State Government Accountability is what I found on their site.
We can redo that part then. So let's redo that part. Okay.
All right. So let's take that one from the top. The Collier Prize, what is it?
The Collier Prize for State Government Accountability is a pretty decent journalism award that is probably, it's probably one of the biggest. So it's designed to set up solid rewards and encourage coverage for state level government. Something that, while I was talking to Dean Brown, he made it really clear that this is something we need.
Something that is harder and harder to find as the landscape changes, particularly in state houses where there used to be a press corps and now there's empty parking lots.
Yeah, that's one of the things that we actually talked about, that, the landscape of journalism has changed a ton everywhere, but it's really obvious when it comes to state level government because the stories that would have gotten covered maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago really aren't getting covered. You're losing out on a lot of coverage because newsrooms can't afford to have these people, covering everything at once. So newsrooms instead have to pick and choose what gets covered, when it gets covered, where it gets covered. And that leaves out a lot of state level government.
State government coverage right now is, I think, in need of help. I mean, I think the state government coverage is really an endangered species of journalism right now.
Nathan Collier, the namesake and funder of the prize, had this great quote, and I probably get a lot of mileage of it at the sponsoring university. Let it be known far and wide that someone is watching. And at root, that's what this enterprise called journalism is all about. Tell me something about the conversation that you had with Dean Brown on the importance of what he calls accountability journalism.
One of the things that really stood out to me during that conversation was that there's this quote from the very famous comic Watchmen, like the whole idea, like who watches the Watchmen? And that's the role that state level government coverage holds. Like, who holds the public officials accountable? Who asks the questions? Who gets into the weeds? And that was really what, Dean Brown and I talked about.
The whole idea of having journalists, having people looking at state government, is to have somebody who is watching what's going on, who responds first to the people, to basically their constituents are the people, and not a political party or a state assembly or state senate office or anything like that. It's really about, what do citizens need in terms of information? And as much as folks on the political side like to think that they know what that is, we know that they're going to operate in their interests and their interests first. And what we need is a voice in state government that operates on behalf of citizens, on behalf of the people who need that information to make rational decisions about how they are to be governed. I think the hallmark of good state government coverage is, first of all, fearlessness and the ability and the willingness to report without fear and without favor. That we have journalists out there who are looking for information, again, for the sake of those people who need that information badly, and who didn't know that there was a particular thing that they needed to know until they read it in that paper or saw it in that broadcast. And so it's about that. It's about being willing to be independent, not just for the sake of having access to politicians and those sorts of things.
It doesn't benefit the politicians who may not like some of the questions they're being asked, but who can probably end up learning something new and redirecting themselves. And it doesn't do anything good for the people who depend on these public officials and politicians.
Is it Brown's view that this doesn't have to be an adversarial relationship between policymakers and journalists?
Right. That's the sense I got, that it can be a solid relationship, a solid back and forth, when someone holds you accountable, it's because they believe you can do better. The sense, while talking with Dean Brown, was that journalists believe that politicians and public officials can do better, and that's what they want. I don't know that anyone wants to come across a scandal or to call out someone that's been a beloved staple in the community. It happens because you go, oh, I want this to be better. I want this to be more. And so, the Collier Prize really seeks to help, nurture that in journalists, because a lot of things are getting in the way of that.
Did he enumerate what some of those things are?
Yeah. Oh, yes. So I think the biggest thing is that the culture around journalism has changed. Like, how you talk about what you're doing, how you can tell stories has changed. Everything is incredibly politicized. That's one of the things we touched upon during our call, that, people are very opinionated about what government journalism can or should be. And it makes it really hard for journalists to want to stay in the field.
That environment is more polarized now, and on all kinds of levels, it just seems full of more palpable anger now than it's been in a long time. We have politicians who really are stoking that anger. We have a lot in our information environment these days on social media where people are rage farming right and left, and so the environment is full of folks who are exercised and angry. It does make it a difficult situation for journalists, for people who are just simply trying to find the truth and share that with people. There's folks who are motivated to either not tell the truth or not reveal what's going on, and they have motive to commit bad acts. We've seen that. That's always been the case to some degree. It seems like it's more serious these days.
also doesn't help that a lot of journalism at the state level is maybe not as well funded as it could be. It might be a little harder to do longer investigative stories, or to have a freelancer that knows a place, get in and get that opportunity to tell a story. And I think funding is consistently one of those big journalism bubble poppers, regardless of the field you're in, because if there's no money, you can't work.
And the reason, obviously, the reason being is the financial rearrangement or dismantlement of news organizations. The resources are just not there. And so we see papers, closing state house bureaus. We see broadcast outlets reducing coverage because they have to be someplace else. And oftentimes, even in those state capitals, they're so thin, they're spread so thin that that they're having trouble covering everything that goes on in state government.
Brown, Collier, and by happy coincidence, you all hail from Florida. Florida is the Sunshine State because sunshine. It is also the Sunshine State because of its decades-long reputation for sunshine laws, open records, open meetings. Where did the conversation with Brown go in terms of transparency and how public officials ought to be thinking about it?
So I can't remember if this is where we talked about the Florida man. I feel like that always is the thing that everybody thinks about. The reason why everyone on the internet is able to go like, oh, this terrible thing or this weird thing is happening in Florida is because our news is like really transparent. You can get information about pretty much anything that happens. Public records are fairly accessible, for better or for worse, because I feel like some people maybe don't need that much information. And I think that's the thing, that what Dean Brown has been observing and experiencing as somebody, nurturing this up and coming and ongoing generation of journalists, is that especially in Florida, you're seeing more people make use of that access, of those records of information, of the tons of text that, passes between government officials, public officials every single day. Like, we send a ton of emails as journalists. Think about how many emails go in and out of a public official's office on a regular basis. And all of this can inform the stories, you tell. And questing this access is something that more people are doing. More people are thinking, oh, I don't have to wait for Florida Man TikTok to find out what strange, concerning, or cool thing is happening in Florida politics. I can just look this up. And that extends to other states too, of course. Florida is just, the most fun for me personally to see this play out. But you have a really interesting setup where people can take things into their own hands. Because I know there are a lot of very young journalists who change how they get information. And they're making use of public records, of historical records. I know many that are very bold. They will go and they will crash an event, mostly respectfully, to get the answers they want. And I think it's really cool because it's really tying back to like old school journalism, but in a new way in some ways, because the energy is brighter, it's fresher, but the tactics, the hunt for access, the urge to get all of this cool information put together, that's the constant. Having
access to the records and all the information that they need to pull things together, that's going to be very important. We know that a lot of things are going on all kinds of levels in the bureaucracy and state government and a lot of other places, and without somebody to sort of watch that for people, things can get out of hand. That is, quite frankly, that's where corruption happens. We know that. We know that when nobody's looking, it's a field day for corruption. We know that when people don't understand or know what's happening, they can't give input. They can't go back to their elected officials and say, we'd rather you focus on this. We'd rather, and what about these things that we're interested in? we need to be able to be part of that information environment. It's not a new phenomenon that folks in government, whether it's in the bureaucracy or in the politically appointed or politically elected positions, they just rather move on without having to answer questions from those pesky journalists.
Talk to me a little bit more about his take on kind of the gonzo journalism that you just described, coupled with open records, coupled with advances in technology that were out of reach of some of the old school predecessors in this business.
Yeah. So for right now, there haven't been any Collier Prize winners that have been like Gen Z kind of news influencers, right? Like you haven't seen a ton of award-winning stories from, people who are on the ground but aren't yet journalists, who may not think of themselves as journalists. But one of the things that was really cool when I was talking to Dean Brown was that he didn't excise them. There is room for them in the future. Them not getting Collier Prizes, not because they aren't doing work or that they don't know how to do the work. It's that maybe they don't know that they can do journalism, that what they're doing is just the next step. We're constantly seeing evolutions in tech, but we're also seeing evolutions in how we interact with each other, how we get our news, where we get our news. For Gen Z, I think TikTok is probably the biggest place that they get their news. They get their news about politics, about pop culture. I got weather news during a hurricane last year from TikTok. And it's important that younger journalists and kids thinking about being influencers for the news, I want them to understand, and I think Dean Brown does too, you can be a journalist. You don't have to Kardashian the news. You can just be a journalist on TikTok. You do the homework, do the legwork, and use the resources that people like Dean Brown are offering. Use the things he talks about, information, like that request thing. It's not hard. There are really cool opportunities out there.
A prize like this, as it gains national attention, as we continue to tell the story of those people who are prize winners and the stories that they've covered and the kinds of issues that they have explored, the idea really is to bring that more and more into the national consciousness, to show people the benefit of good, strong accountability journalism that opens up so many different avenues in terms of giving people information about things that they, that they did not realize was going on behind closed doors, or that they didn't realize that they needed to have a say in. And we want national attention on that type of work so that more people will do it. Selfishly, here at the University of Florida, I want to make sure that students are inspired. Students do want to know where they can do good. They're looking to do good. And the Collier Prize will help us to show students this is a path that is worth doing. This is a calling that is worth answering. We want to make sure that students understand that yes, this work can be tough. It can be difficult to do, but it's worth doing. And it's a cause that they can get behind. And one way to do that in the journalism world is to write in the interest of accountability, in the interest of helping people to have tools to make government more accountable to them.
Great.
That's the whole game.
Thank you for doing this, Zena. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
And that will do it for us this time around. Our editorial and production team includes Theo Douglas, Zoe Manzanetti, and Kaylee Tedrow. Our executive editor is Noel Nell. Our editors-in-chief are Dustin Heisler and Kathleen Robinette.
The Future in Context is now available on YouTube in addition to the usual spots: Spotify, Apple, Audible, and Odyssey.
For Ashley Silver, I'm Paul Taylor. Thanks for listening. Stay up to date with the show at tfic.tech.